I never thought I'd give birth on a concrete floor with my wrists still bruised from handcuffs. I was 22 years old, 3 months away from graduating with my nursing degree, when they arrested me outside the campus library. The charge was theft. $5,000 had gone missing from the university's scholarship fund, and somehow every piece of circumstantial evidence pointed directly at me. I didn't take that money. I swear on everything I love, I didn't take it. But nobody believed me. Not the campus police, not the dean, not even my roommate, who stopped answering my calls the day my face appeared on the local news. They put me in county jail while they built their case. My court-appointed lawyer was a tired man named Mr. Brennan, who smelled like old coffee and kept mixing up my name with his other clients. He told me to take a plea deal. He said fighting it would only make things worse. I told him I was innocent. He sighed and said that didn't matter as much as I thought it did. I found out I was pregnant 2 weeks after they locked me up. The nurse at the jail clinic was a white woman in her 50s, with deep lines around her mouth. She looked at the test result, then looked at me, and I saw something flicker in her eyes. Not sympathy, more like confirmation of something she'd already assumed. She asked me if I knew who the father was. The way she asked it made my stomach turn, like she expected me to say I wasn't sure, like she expected me to fit into whatever story she'd already written about girls like me. I knew exactly who the father was. His name was Marcus Hale, and I met him at a hospital charity gala 6 months earlier. I'd been working part-time as a catering server to help pay for textbooks. He was one of the donors, a man so wealthy that people literally stepped aside when he walked through a room. He was older than me, probably late 30s, with dark skin, gray-flecked hair at his temples, and eyes that seemed to see right through whatever mask you were wearing. We talked for maybe 10 minutes that night. He asked me about school. I told him about my dream of becoming a pediatric nurse. He smiled and said the world needed more people who actually cared. I didn't expect to ever see him again, but 2 weeks later he showed up at the coffee shop where I studied between classes. He said he'd asked around to find out where I spent my time. He said he couldn't stop thinking about our conversation. I should have been scared. I should have seen all the red flags. But I was so tired of being invisible, of working 3 jobs just to barely survive, of eating ramen 4 nights a week. When he looked at me, I felt seen. I felt valuable. We started seeing each other in secret. He said he had to be careful because of his business, because of the press, because people wouldn't understand. I told myself it was romantic. I told myself I was special. I got pregnant after 3 months, and when I told him, he went completely silent. Then he asked if I was sure it was his. That question broke something in me I didn't know could break. I left his penthouse apartment that night and never went back. He called twice, I didn't answer. Then the calls stopped, and I realized he'd already moved on. I planned to handle it alone. I was going to finish school, have my baby, and figure out the rest as I went. But then the theft accusation happened, and my entire life collapsed like a house made of cards. Now I was in jail, pregnant, and facing felony charges. The other inmates treated me like I had a disease. Most of them were in for drug possession or probation violations. Women who'd been through the system so many times they knew all the guards by name. They looked at me and saw someone who thought she was better than them, someone who'd gotten knocked up by some man and then tried to steal money to fix it. That's what one woman said to me during lunch on my 2nd week. She sat down across from me, looked at my barely showing belly, and said, "Let me guess, baby daddy ain't around, so you thought you'd help yourself to somebody else's cash." I didn't respond. I learned quickly that defending yourself in here just made things worse. The pregnancy got harder. Morning sickness became all-day sickness. I couldn't keep food down. The jail doctor was a man who seemed annoyed every time I showed up for a checkup. He told me I was fine, that nausea was normal, that I needed to stop complaining. But I knew something was wrong. I'd taken enough anatomy classes to know that this level of exhaustion was not normal. I asked for an ultrasound. He said the county didn't approve those except in emergencies. I was 4 months along when I started showing more than I should have been. One of the guards noticed. Her name was Officer Chen, and unlike most of the staff, she didn't look at me like I was garbage. She pulled me aside one afternoon and asked if anyone had actually checked on the baby. I told her about the doctor. She frowned and said she'd see what she could do. 2 days later, they took me to the medical wing for an ultrasound. The technician was a young guy who barely made eye contact. He squeezed the cold gel on my stomach and moved the wand around, staring at the screen. Then he stopped. He leaned forward. He moved the wand slower this time. Then he got up without saying a word and left the room. I lay there on that table, half naked and terrified for almost 10 minutes before a doctor came in. Not the usual jail doctor, someone else, a woman with kind eyes and a stethoscope around her neck. She looked at the screen, then looked at me, and I saw something flicker in her eyes. Not sympathy, more like confirmation of something she'd already assumed. She asked me if I knew who the father was. The way she asked it made my stomach turn, like she expected me to say I wasn't sure, like she expected me to fit into whatever story she'd already written about girls like me. I knew exactly who the father was. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't process the words. Triplets. 3 babies. 3 lives growing inside me while I sat in a cell. 3 children who would be born into a world where their mother was labeled a criminal. The doctor kept talking, explaining something about nutrition and high-risk pregnancy and the need for monitoring, but I couldn't hear her anymore. All I could think was that Marcus Hale had 3 children coming into this world, and he had no idea. And even if he did know, he wouldn't care. The jail didn't know what to do with me after that. Pregnant inmates were one thing. Pregnant inmates carrying triplets were a liability. They moved me to a single cell in the medical wing, a tiny room with a cot, a toilet, and a barred window that looked out onto a concrete courtyard. I spent hours staring through those bars, watching the sky change colors, wondering how I'd ended up here. My belly grew fast after that. By 6 months, I looked like I was about to burst. The other inmates whispered when I walked by. The guards made jokes about how I must have really been desperate to end up like this. One of them, a man named Officer Ruiz, asked me once if I even knew which guy was the father. He laughed when I didn't answer. He said girls like me always thought we were smarter than we actually were. I stopped talking after that. I stopped trying to explain. I stopped hoping anyone would believe me. My lawyer visited once during my 6th month. He told me the prosecution had a witness who claimed they saw me accessing the scholarship fund account. He said the witness was credible. He said I should really consider the plea deal. I asked him if he actually believed I did it. He looked at me for a long time, then said it didn't matter what he believed. I fired him the next day. I didn't have money for a new lawyer, so I was on my own. The babies moved constantly. I could feel them shifting, pressing against my ribs, fighting for space. I talked to them sometimes, late at night when no one could hear me. I told them I was sorry. I told them I would fix this somehow. I told them their father was a powerful man who could give them everything, even if he wanted nothing to do with me. I went into labor 3 weeks early. It was 2 in the morning. I woke up to pain so sharp I thought I was dying. I called for the guard on duty, but no one came. I called again, louder. Finally, Officer Chen appeared. She took one look at me and started yelling into her radio. Everything happened fast after that. They got me onto a stretcher. They rolled me through hallways that smelled like disinfectant and sweat. They loaded me into an ambulance. I remember the lights flashing above me, red and blue like warning signs. The hospital wouldn't admit me at first. They said I was a prisoner and needed to be transported to the county medical facility. Officer Chen, who'd stayed with me, started arguing with the intake nurse. She said I was having triplets and they didn't have time for protocol. The nurse made a phone call. 15 minutes later, they admitted me. The delivery room was cold and bright and filled with people I didn't know: doctors, nurses, security guards stationed by the door because I was still technically an inmate. They strapped monitors to my belly. They hooked me up to an IV. The contractions were coming so fast I couldn't catch my breath between them. One of the nurses leaned over me. She had red hair and freckles. She told me I needed to push. I told her I couldn't. She said I didn't have a choice. So I pushed. I pushed until I thought my body would split in half. I pushed until I heard the first cry, thin and sharp, cutting through all the noise in the room. "It's a girl," someone said. I didn't have time to process it. The second baby came 8 minutes later, another girl. Then the third 11 minutes after that, another girl. 3 daughters, 3 perfect, tiny daughters who I couldn't even hold because they whisked them away to make sure they were stable. I lay there on that table, shaking and bleeding and crying, and all I could think was that I'd just brought 3 lives into a world that had already decided I was worthless. They let me see them an hour later. 3 incubators lined up in the neonatal unit, 3 impossibly small humans with dark skin and delicate features and little fists that clenched and unclenched like they were already fighting. I touched the plastic of the incubator, wishing I could feel their skin. A nurse stood next to me, checking monitors and making notes on a clipboard. Then she said something that made my blood stop. "They all have the same birthmark. I've never seen that before with triplets." I looked closer. There, on each baby's left shoulder blade, was a mark, not a common birthmark. This was distinct, shaped almost like a crescent moon with a single star just above it. Identical on all 3 of them, perfect and precise, like it had been stamped there on purpose. My breath caught. I knew that mark. I'd seen it before, 6 months ago when Marcus Hales on his left shoulder blade when I stayed at his penthouse. He'd told me it was a family mark, something passed down through generations on his father's side. He said only direct descendants carried it, and it always appeared in the exact same place. He said it almost proudly, like it was proof of his lineage, proof of his bloodline. And now my 3 daughters carried it too. The nurse was still talking, saying something about genetic markers and how unusual it was, but I wasn't listening anymore. I was thinking about Marcus Hale, about his empire, about the way he looked at me when I told him I was pregnant and asked if he was sure it was his. These babies were proof, undeniable, genetic proof. But what good was proof when I was sitting in a jail cell? They moved me back to county lockup 2 days after the delivery. My body was wrecked. I could barely walk. I bled through the thin pads they gave me. My breasts ached with milk I couldn't feed to my babies because they were still in the hospital, being monitored, being cared for by strangers, while I rotted in a cell. Officer Chen came to check on me. She brought me extra pads and a pack of crackers from the vending machine. She asked if I had anyone on the outside who could help with the babies. I told her no. She asked about the father. I told her he didn't know. She looked at me like she wanted to say something, but she didn't. She just nodded and left. The other inmates were worse after I came back. One woman, a tall, light-skinned girl with scars on her arms, cornered me in the bathroom. She said I thought I was special because I had triplets. She said I was still just another broke girl who got knocked up and tried to steal my way out. She shoved me against the wall. I didn't fight back. I didn't have the strength. I thought about Marcus Hale every single day. I thought about calling him. I thought about writing a letter. But what would I even say? I got pregnant with your triplets, went to jail for a crime I didn't commit, and by the way, all three babies have your family's birthmark? He'd probably think I was lying. He'd probably think I was trying to trap him. Rich men like him had lawyers to handle problems like me. But the birthmark kept haunting me. It was too specific, too precise. Anyone who knew the Hale family would recognize it instantly. And Marcus Hale wasn't just wealthy, he was famous. His face had been on the cover of Forbes twice. His charitable foundation funded hospitals and schools across 3 states. People knew who he was. People knew about that birthmark. I made a decision on my 7th day back in jail. I asked Officer Chen for help. I told her everything. I told her about Marcus Hale, about the relationship, about the birthmark. I told her the babies were proof and I needed someone to verify it. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. Then she asked if I was absolutely sure about what I was saying. I told her I'd never been more sure of anything in my life. She said she'd see what she could do. I didn't hear anything for 3 days. Then, on a Thursday morning, Officer Chen came to my cell. She told me someone from Child Protective Services wanted to talk to me. My heart sank. I thought they were going to take my babies away permanently. I thought this was the end. But it wasn't CPS. It was a lawyer, a real one. A woman in a tailored suit with sharp eyes and a leather briefcase. Her name was Miss Diane Pruitt, and she worked for a firm I'd never heard of. She sat down across from me in the visitation room and said someone had contacted her office about my case. She said she'd reviewed the charges against me and found several inconsistencies. She said she believed I was innocent. Then she asked me about the babies, about the father, about the birthmark. I told her everything. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and said, "Marcus Hale is one of the most powerful men in this state. If what you're saying is true, this changes everything, but I need to confirm it first." She arranged for an independent geneticist to examine the babies. She petitioned the court to allow DNA testing. The prosecutor fought it, claiming it was irrelevant to the theft charges, but Ms. Pruitt argued that establishing paternity was critical to my circumstances and my ability to provide for my children post-release. The judge agreed to allow it. The test results came back in 8 days. Marcus Hale was the biological father of all 3 girls, and the birthmark was confirmed to be a hereditary trait, unique to the Hale bloodline, documented in medical records going back 4 generations. Miss Pruitt called me into a private meeting. She told me the results were irrefutable. She told me she'd reached out to Marcus Hale's legal team with the information. Then she said something I didn't expect. "He's coming here, tomorrow. He wants to see you." I didn't sleep that night. They brought him in through a side entrance the next afternoon. I was waiting in a private visitation room, wearing the same orange jumpsuit I'd been wearing for months, my hair pulled back in a messy bun because I didn't have the energy to care anymore. The door opened, and there he was, Marcus Hale. He looked exactly the same. Expensive suit, perfect posture, that same unreadable expression he always wore in public. But when his eyes met mine, something cracked. I saw guilt there. I saw fear. I saw a man who'd convinced himself I didn't matter, and now he couldn't ignore me anymore. He sat down across from me. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then he said, "I didn't know." I laughed. It came out bitter and sharp. "You didn't want to know. There's a difference." He looked away. "When you told me you were pregnant, I thought, you thought I was lying. You thought I was trying to trap you. You thought I was just another poor black girl looking for a payout." He didn't deny it. He just sat there, staring at his hands. I leaned forward. "They have your mark, Marcus. All 3 of them. Your family's mark. The one you told me about. The one that proves bloodline. You can't deny them now." His jaw tightened. "I'm not denying them." "Then what are you doing here?" He finally looked at me again. I'm here to fix this." I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw something, but all I could do was sit there and wait for him to explain. He told me his legal team had been investigating my case since Miss Pruitt contacted them. He said they'd found evidence that the actual thief was a university administrator who'd been embezzling from multiple scholarship funds for years. He said the evidence against me had been fabricated to cover the real crime. He said his lawyers were filing motions to have the charges dismissed and were pushing for my immediate release. I couldn't process it. After months of hell, after giving birth on the edge of desperation, after losing everything, suddenly I was supposed to believe it would all just go away? "Why now?" I asked. "Why do you suddenly care?" He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Because they're my daughters, and because I was a coward." That was the first honest thing he'd said. He told me he wanted to provide for the girls. He wanted to set up trust funds, pay for their education, make sure they had everything they needed. He said I could live in one of his properties rent-free until I got back on my feet. He said he'd hire the best lawyers to clear my record completely. I asked him what he wanted in return. He looked confused. "Nothing. I just want to do right by them." I didn't believe him. Rich men always wanted something. But then he said, "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I know I failed you when you needed me most, but those girls deserve better than what I gave you, so I'm asking you to let me be their father, not for me, for them." I thought about my daughters in those incubators, carrying a mark that proved they belonged to a world I could never access on my own. I thought about the life I could give them versus the life he could give them. I thought about my pride versus their future. And I realized that sometimes love means letting go of your anger, even when you have every right to hold on to it. "I'll let you be their father," I said, "but I'm their mother. I make the decisions. I have final say. You don't get to swoop in and erase me just because you're rich." He nodded. I wouldn't want to. The charges were dropped 6 days later. The university administrator was arrested. The evidence against me was officially declared inadmissible. The judge apologized on behalf of the court. It didn't undo the months I'd lost. It didn't undo the humiliation, but it gave me my freedom back. Marcus picked me up from the jail in a black SUV with tinted windows. He didn't say much during the drive. He took me straight to the hospital where my daughters had been transferred to a private wing. When I walked into that room and saw them for the first time as a free woman, I broke down completely. I held all 3 of them one at a time, and I whispered promises I intended to keep. Marcus watched from the doorway. When I finally looked up at him, he had tears in his eyes too. We named them together, Zara, Amara, and Kaya, 3 names that meant princess, grace, and diamond. 3 girls who would grow up knowing they were wanted, knowing they were loved, knowing they carried a mark that proved they belonged. Marcus kept his word. He set up the trust funds. He bought a house in my name, a beautiful place with a yard and a nursery painted in soft yellow. He hired a nanny to help me while I finished my degree. He showed up every week to spend time with the girls, and slowly, carefully, we learned how to co-parent. It wasn't perfect. There were hard conversations. There were moments when I wanted to scream at him for abandoning me when I needed him most. There were moments when he struggled to balance his public image with the reality of having 3 daughters with a woman the press tried to turn into a scandal. But we figured it out. For them. I graduated with my nursing degree 8 months after my release. Marcus came to the ceremony. So did Miss Pruitt. So did Officer Chen, who I stayed in touch with because she'd been the only person who believed me when it mattered. I walked across that stage with my head high, knowing my daughters were watching from the audience, knowing I'd survived something that should have destroyed me. The triplets are 2 years old now. They're loud and wild and brilliant. Zara is the leader, Amara is the thinker, Kaya is the fighter. They all have their father's eyes and their mother's smile, and they all carry that crescent moon mark on their left shoulder blades, a reminder that they come from somewhere powerful, even if the road to get here was broken. Sometimes I look at them and I still can't believe they're mine. Marcus asked me once if I regretted anything. I told him I regretted that it took a birthmark for him to see his own children, but I didn't regret them. I could never regret them. He nodded and said he'd spend the rest of his life making sure they knew they mattered. I believe him now. People ask me how I survived those months in jail, how I gave birth in those conditions, how I kept going when everything seemed hopeless. I tell them I didn't have a choice. When you're carrying 3 lives inside you, you don't get the luxury of giving up. You just keep breathing. You just keep moving. You just keep believing that somehow, some way, the truth will come to light. And sometimes, if you're lucky, it does. I work as a pediatric nurse now at a children's hospital Marcus helped fund. I see kings every day who are fighting battles they shouldn't have to fight. I see parents who are doing everything they can with nothing in their hands. I see families held together by hope and prayers and the belief that tomorrow might be better than today. And I understand them in a way I never could have before, because I was them once. The triplets start preschool next year. Marcus wants to send them to the most prestigious private school in the state. I told him we'd consider it, but I also want them to understand where they come from. I want them to know their mother was a poor student who fought her way through hell to give them a life. I want them to know their father was a man who made mistakes but chose to fix them. I want them to know that the mark on their shoulder isn't just about bloodline or legacy or wealth. It's about proof. Proof that they existed when the world tried to erase them. Proof that their mother told the truth when everyone called her a liar. Proof that sometimes the most powerful thing you can carry isn't money or status. It's evidence of who you really are. I still think about those days in that cell sometimes, when the weight of everything felt too heavy to carry. I think about the guards who mocked me. I think about the inmates who judged me. I think about the system that tried to bury me. And I think about the moment I saw that crescent moon mark on my daughter's skin and realized that some truths are too strong to hide. Marcus told me recently that the Hale family mark goes back 7 generations. He said his great-great-great-grandfather was a freed slave who built a shipping company from nothing. He said the mark appeared on that man's firstborn son, and it's been passed down through every direct descendant since then. He said it represents resilience, survival, the refusal to be erased. I told him our daughters carry it well. We're not together, Marcus and I. We probably never will be. Too much happened. Too much pain. Too much history. But we're family now in the way that matters. We show up for our girls. We make decisions together. We put them first. And on the days when it's hard, when the memories come back and I feel that old fear creeping in, I look at Zara and Amara and Kaya, and I remember why I survived. Not for myself, for them. Because every child deserves a mother who fights. Every child deserves a father who shows up. And every child deserves to know that the mark they carry, whatever it is proof that they belong to something bigger than the mistakes that came before them. The triplets are sleeping now, in the room next to mine. 3 small bodies curled up in their beds, 3 nightlights glowing softly in the dark. And for the first time in a long time, I sleep without nightmares. I watch them sometimes through the crack in their door, these 3 perfect souls who never asked to be born into chaos. Zara sleeps with her fist under her chin. Amara spreads out like a starfish. Kaya curls into a tight ball, protective even in sleep. I memorize these details because I know how quickly time moves, how fast they'll grow, how soon they'll start asking questions I'm not sure I'm ready to answer. Marcus has been more present than I expected. He comes every Tuesday and Thursday evening and every other weekend the girls stay at his penthouse. He had it child-proofed by professionals, installed gates on the stairs, covered every sharp corner. The first time I dropped them off there, I stood in his marble foyer holding their diaper bags and feeling like an imposter. This was a world I'd once visited as a secret, as someone who didn't belong. Now I was walking through it as the mother of his children, and everyone knew it. His staff treats me with careful respect now. The same doorman who once looked through me like I was invisible now greets me by name. The housekeeper who I'd hidden from when I snuck out that last morning now asks about the girls' favorite snacks so she can stock the kitchen. It's strange how money changes the way people see you, even when you don't have any yourself. But Marcus doesn't try to buy me. That's something I appreciate about him now, even if it took me a long time to trust it. He pays child support that's more than generous. He covers all their medical expenses, their clothes, their toys, their future education. But he never holds it over my head. He never uses his wealth as leverage in our co-parenting. When we disagree about something, we talk about it like adults. And when I make a decision as their mother, he respects it. It wasn't always like this. In the beginning, there was tension, there was resentment. There were moments when I'd look at him holding Amara and I'd remember lying on that jail clinic table, alone, being told I was carrying triplets, while he was probably at some gala or business meeting, completely unaware. There were moments when he'd suggest something for the girls and I'd snap at him, reminding him that he'd missed their entire first 3 months of life because he'd assumed I was lying. We went to therapy for it. Not couples therapy because we're not a couple, co-parenting therapy. A woman named Dr. Simmons who specialized in high-conflict family dynamics. She helped us work through the anger. She helped Marcus understand the depth of what I'd endured. She helped me understand that holding on to bitterness would only poison the environment we were trying to create for our daughters. It took almost a year, but we got there. Now when I see him with the girls, I don't feel anger anymore. I feel something closer to gratitude. Not for him specifically, but for the fact that they have a father who wants to be present. So many kids grow up without that. So many kids carry the weight of a parent who chose to disappear. Our daughters won't have that burden. The media eventually found out about the triplets. It was inevitable. Marcus Hale couldn't have 3 children without the press catching wind of it. They published articles with headlines like "Billionaire's Secret Triplets" and "The Poor Student Who Gave Birth to an Empire's Heirs." Some of the stories were sympathetic, others were cruel. They called me a gold digger. They said I'd trapped him on purpose. They questioned whether the babies were really his, even though the DNA test was a matter of legal record. I stopped reading the articles after the first week. Ms. Pruitt handled all the press inquiries. She released one statement on my behalf that said I was focused on my daughters and my career, and that I had no further comment. Marcus released a statement saying that he was proud to be the father of his 3 girls, that their mother was a remarkable woman who'd overcome extraordinary circumstances, and that anyone who tried to harass or defame me would be met with legal action. The stories died down after that, but the damage was done. My face had been plastered across gossip sites and tabloid magazines. People recognized me at the grocery store, at the hospital where I worked, at the park when I took the girls out in their triple stroller. Some people were kind. They'd say they admired my strength or that my daughters were beautiful. Others were less kind. They'd whisper, they'd stare, they'd make assumptions. I learned to hold my head high anyway. Dr. Simmons told me once that trauma doesn't define you unless you let it. She said surviving something hard doesn't make you broken, it makes you a survivor. She said the story I tell my daughters about where they came from will shape how they see themselves and how they see me. So I've been thinking about what I'll say when they're old enough to ask. I'll tell them the truth. Not all of it at once, not when they're too young to understand, but eventually I'll sit them down and I'll explain that their mother made a mistake by falling for a man who wasn't ready to be a father. I'll tell them that I was falsely accused of a crime I didn't commit and that I spent months in jail while pregnant with them. I'll tell them about the birthmark that proved who they were when the world tried to say I was lying. I'll tell them that their father made a mistake by not believing me, but that he chose to make it right when he learned the truth. And I'll tell them that they were born from pain, yes, but also from love, from my refusal to give up on them even when everything else had fallen apart. I want them to know they're not a mistake. They're not a scandal. They're not a headline. They're my daughters, and they're his daughters, and they're exactly who they were always meant to be. The house Marcus bought for us is in a neighborhood I never could have afforded on my own. It's a quiet street with old trees and sidewalks where kids ride bikes. The neighbors are mostly professional families, doctors, lawyers, and business owners. When I first moved in, I felt out of place. I felt like everyone could see that I didn't belong here, that I was just the poor girl who got lucky by getting pregnant with the right man's babies. But then Zara started waving at everyone on the porch, Amara started picking flowers from the garden and giving them to the neighbor's elderly mother, Kaya started challenging the older kids to races on the sidewalk. And slowly, we became part of the community. Not as Marcus Hale's baby mama, not as the woman from the scandal, just as the family in the yellow house with the 3 energetic toddlers. I finished my nursing degree and passed my licensing exam on the first try. Marcus offered to support me financially so I wouldn't have to work, but I refused. I needed to work. I needed my daughters to see me as more than just their mother. I needed them to see me as a woman with her own identity, her own career, her own purpose. I got hired at St. Catherine's Children's Hospital in the pediatric oncology unit. It's hard work. I see kids fighting cancer, fighting chronic illness, fighting battles that no child should ever have to face. I see parents who would give anything to trade places with their sick children. I see families praying for miracles. And I'm grateful every single day that my daughters are healthy. The birthmark still fascinates people. When the girls go to the pediatrician or get their vaccinations, nurses always comment on it. They say they've never seen anything like it. 3 siblings with identical marks in identical locations. Some people ask if it's a tattoo, which is absurd considering they're toddlers. I've started explaining that it's a hereditary trait from their father's family, something passed down through generations. What I don't say is that it saved us. That mark is the reason Marcus couldn't deny them. That mark is the reason I'm not still sitting in a jail cell wondering if anyone would ever believe me. That mark is the reason my daughters have a future that looks nothing like the one I had growing up. I grew up poor. I mean really poor. The kind of poor where you wear shoes with holes in them until they literally fall apart. Where dinner is whatever you can find in the pantry because there's no money for groceries. Where you learn not to ask for things because you already know the answer is no. My mother worked 3 jobs and still couldn't keep the lights on sometimes. My father left before I was old enough to remember his face. I swore I'd never let my children experience that kind of poverty. I swore I'd do whatever it took to give them better. And then I ended up in jail, pregnant and alone, with no money and no future and no hope. But the universe has a strange way of working things out. Or maybe it's not the universe. Maybe it's just that sometimes when you refuse to give up, when you keep fighting even when everything tells you to quit, you force reality to bend in your direction. That's what I did. I fought. I survived. And my daughters are living proof that it was worth it. Marcus asked me last month if I'd ever consider letting him propose. Not now, he clarified quickly, but someday, when enough time had passed, when we'd both healed. He said he cared about me, that he admired me, that he wanted us to be a real family. I told him I'd think about it. The truth is, I don't know if I could ever trust him like that again. Marriage isn't just about love. It's about trust. It's about knowing that when things get hard, the other person won't disappear. And Marcus did disappear. He walked away when I needed him most. The fact that he came back doesn't erase that. But I also know that people can change. I've seen it happen. I've seen men who were terrible fathers learn to be good ones. I've seen women who were broken by trauma find their strength again. I've seen families that should have fallen apart somehow stay together. Maybe we could be one of those families. Maybe. For now, we're taking it one day at a time. The girls are growing so fast it terrifies me. Zara is already starting to string together full sentences. Amara can count to 20. Kaya knows all her colors and half the alphabet. They're smart, all three of them, wickedly smart. Sometimes I look at them and I think about the fact that they carry DNA from a self-made billionaire and from a woman who clawed her way out of poverty and false imprisonment. And I wonder what kind of force they'll become when they're grown. They'll be unstoppable, I'm sure of it. Officer Chen still checks in on me every few months. She'll text me photos of the girls from their Christmas card, or ask how nursing school went, or tell me about something funny that happened at work. She never treated me like I was guilty. She never looked at me with disgust or pity. She just treated me like a human being who deserved basic dignity. And that meant more than she probably realized. I told her once that she saved my life. She said she just did her job, but we both know it was more than that. In a system designed to dehumanize, she chose to see me as human. That's not just doing your job, that's being a good person. Miss Pruitt still sends me updates on the case against the university administrator who actually stole the money. He was convicted and sentenced to 6 years in federal prison. The university issued a public apology and offered me a settlement. I took it. I used the money to set up college funds for the girls and to donate to a nonprofit that helps wrongfully accused women navigate the legal system. I could have been bitter. I could have sued for more. I could have demanded that everyone who doubted me publicly apologize. But what would that accomplish? It wouldn't give me back the time I lost. It wouldn't erase the trauma. It would just keep me stuck in the past, reliving the worst period of my life over and over. I chose to move forward instead. My mother met the triplets when they were 6 months old. She flew in from across the country, taking time off from her job at a warehouse to come see her granddaughters. When she walked through the door of the house Marcus had bought for me, she cried. She said she never imagined I'd have something like this. She said she was proud of me. I told her I was proud of her, too, because she survived her own hell to raise me, and I wouldn't have made it through mine without the example she set. She asked about Marcus. I told her the whole story. She listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she said, "Baby, I don't care how much money that man has. What matters is whether he shows up for those girls. Does he?" I told him he does. She nodded. Then that's enough, for now. The triplets call him Daddy. They light up when he walks through the door. They climb on him and pull his tie and demand that he read them stories. He's patient with them in a way I didn't expect. He gets down on the floor and plays with their toys. He makes silly voices when he reads. He lets him paint his nails during tea parties. He's not perfect. He still travels for business too much. He still sometimes forgets to check with me before making plans for the girls. He still carries guilt that shows up in the way he overcompensates, buying them too many toys or saying yes when he should say no. But he's trying, and that matters. I'm trying too, trying to forgive, trying to let go of the anger, trying to build a life that doesn't revolve around what happened to me, but around what I'm building now. Some days are harder than others. Some days I wake up and I can still feel the cold concrete under me, can still hear the sound of that jail cell door slamming shut. Some days I look at my daughters and I think about how close I came to losing them, to losing everything. But then Zara reaches for me with her small hands, or Amara says, "Love you, Mama," or Kaya falls asleep on my chest while I rock her. And I remember that I didn't lose. I survived. We all survived. And that's worth more than any verdict or settlement or apology could ever be. I tell my story sometimes now, not to the media, but in small ways. I spoke at a panel for wrongfully accused individuals. I talked to a group of nursing students about resilience and second chances. I shared my experience with a support group for mothers who gave birth while incarcerated. Every time I tell the story, it gets a little easier. The pain becomes less sharp. The trauma becomes less present. It becomes just a thing that happened to me, not the thing that defines me. Marcus told me he tells his business associates about the girls now. He used to keep them private, worried about the scandal, worried about his image. But he says he realized that hiding them was another form of shame, and they deserved better than that. So now their photos are on his desk at work. He mentions them in interviews. He brings them to company events. He's owning it, finally. The crescent moon birthmark that started all of this has become something the girls are proud of. When they're at the park and other kids ask about it, they say, "It's our special mark. It means we're strong." They don't know the full story yet. They don't know about the jail or the doubt or the DNA test. They just know they're special. And they are. Not because of the money they'll inherit or the name they carry, but because they're survivors. Because they were wanted even when the world said they shouldn't exist. Because they have a mother who fought for them and a father who learned to do better. Last week, Zara asked me why some of her friends only have one house and she has two. I told her that different families look different ways, and that's okay. She thought about it for a moment, then said, "I like having two houses. That means more places for my toys." I laughed, because she's 2 years old and the complexity of our situation doesn't exist for her yet. For her, life is simple. She has a mama and a daddy who both love her. She has 2 sisters to play with. She has a safe place to sleep and food to eat and people who show up for her. That's all she needs to know right now. The rest can wait. I keep a journal for each of the girls. I write to them every few months, telling them about who they're becoming, about the milestones they're hitting, about the funny things they say and do. But I also write about the hard parts, about how I almost didn't make it, about how scared I was, about how the birthmark they carry saved us all. One day, when they're old enough, I'll give them those journals, and they'll know the full truth of where they came from. Not a sanitized version, not a fairy tale. The real, messy, painful, beautiful truth. Because they deserve to know. They deserve to understand that they were born from something broken, but became something whole. That their existence is proof that even when everything falls apart, somehow, some way, you can build something new from the pieces. The house is quiet now. The girls are asleep. Marcus just left after putting them to bed and helping me clean up the disaster zone that was dinner. We stood in the kitchen together, washing dishes and talking about preschool applications, and for a moment, it felt almost normal. Almost like we were a regular family doing regular things. Maybe that's what healing looks like. Not some grand moment of forgiveness or closure, just ordinary moments that string together into a life that works. I think about the woman I was 3 years ago, the scared, pregnant student sitting in a jail cell wondering if anyone would ever believe her. I think about how I felt when I saw that birthmark the first time on my daughter's skin and realized I had proof. I think about how far we've all come since then. Sometimes people ask me how I did it, how I survived, how I kept going. The truth is, I don't know. I just put one foot in front of the other. I just kept breathing. I just refused to let the story end there. And maybe that's the lesson. Maybe survival isn't some grand heroic act. Maybe it's just the stubborn refusal to give up, even when giving up would be so much easier. My daughters will face their own battles someday. They'll encounter people who doubt them, systems that fail them, moments when everything feels impossible. And when they do, I hope they remember where they came from. I hope they remember that they carry a mark that means something, not because of who their father is or how much money is in their trust funds, but because they survived before they took their first breath. I walk to their womb one more time before bed. 3 small shapes under 3 blankets. 3 faces that look like mine and like their father's. 3 miracles I almost didn't get to keep. I whisper goodnight to each of them, even though they're already deep in sleep. And then I go to my own room, crawl into bed, and close my eyes without fear for the first time in what feels like forever.